All right, React session. We're in session with React, so we're going to talk about some pretty nice concepts. To be honest, so why you would want to choose React. Um, One being the virtual DOM, which is quite a cool feature to be honest, and you'll appreciate it. All right, so we want to take a look at this with React. My pointer's not working again. All right, so we want to look at some of these topics here, which are going to be virtual DOM, JSX, and React fragments. So we're going to talk about the virtual DOM. So as you know, the DOM, which is the document object model. So when you go to a web page, when you have you know the when you look at the markup, you have the HTML, you have the header tag, you have the title, you have the H1, and all these things inside the document. But what happens is it gets translated in the browser, V8 engine, and these kind of things, right? So it can understand the model of it. um, it'll be compiled into an object that is like a tree, right? We have different roots, we have different branches that have nodes, and that's how they talk about the DOM tree, the document object tree. So React handles the rendering using something called a virtual DOM, because typically updating the DOM, the document object model, traditionally has been very slow. What will happen is, when you make a change, maybe the change might be way down in the bottom level here on this kind of node here where it says link text. Maybe that could be like a, a clock ticking, which I'll have an example in a little bit. And when it needs to refresh, maybe you have a set timer and you need to refresh, it needs to tear down the entire tree and re-render it just to update that little node. So that's slow. So what React up with is an interesting concept called the virtual DOM. And basically, it is a virtual representation of the UI that's kept in memory and synced with the browser by React DOM. So what happens is, we want to. So in a nutshell, what happens is that it takes a copy of the document object that's in the browser. So it takes this copy, and when there is a change, it'll do the reconciliation, called the tree reconciliation, so that it'll actually only update the nodes that it needs to, and then when it's ready, it's going to basically take that copy and overwrite the DOM, the whole DOM tree, in a sense. That's just updating those nodes, and not tearing down the entire tree, just only keeping track and syncing of what needs to be updated and when it needs to be updated. So it's very fast compared to manipulating the entire page and redrawing it for minor changes. It's super fast. So this is one of the reasons why that React is taken off, because of its speed. So if we look at this here quickly, it's going to show you kind of when I talked to you. It says the virtual DOM there. You'll see the nodes there, and you'll see that there's a state change, and it computes the difference, and then it re-renders this only these nodes. Whereas in the regular browser DOM, the entire tree gets computed and re-rendered, but the whole tree is being re-rendered just for these nodes. So React will compare the updated virtual DOM with the snapshot of the previous. So it does that reconciliation. It's called diffing. Compares the new one with the previous state, figures out the changes, and React will only update the changes in the real DOM that needs to be updated. So one note is it maintains two virtual DOMs at any time, previous one and the current changes. It's very interesting. I mean, Angular framework has something called the shadow DOM. It basically does kind of hot swapping as well, but not in this kind of way. So the strategy here is on. So what we need to remember is on every update to a component, React builds a new virtual DOM subtree. It does diffing with the actual DOM. It computes the minimal DOM mutation and then batch executes updates. So what that means is that it's not always going to update when you expect it to at that point in time. It tries to batch as many updates as it can and then refresh. Not that there's going to be a very big delay. You may not see it instantly because it needs to be performant and try to be very efficient with its updates, right? Speed is in mind, and the more it can batch execute, the better. So I just want to give an example quickly, if I can bring this up here somewhere, if I got this. Very good example I had from this JS Complete um, example by Samir Boumé, I think that's the name. I don't wanna if I mispronounce it, I apologize, but this is a very good one. So we have two elements here. We have, if you can see, this is just a simple function. It's a functional component. And what it does is it goes and it just returns inside of this, inside of the inner, so it has something called, it's mounting a node, and the inside of the node, it's updating this entire fragment with the time. And it's on, so both of these are called, the render is called on interval. So down here, there's actually an interval. So every 1 second or every millisecond, what have you, 1 second, let's say, I guess that's what it's doing, is re-rendering this, right? And this is doing the HTML way. And this is doing the React DOM way. So the React is using the render, it's going through React DOM, that whole engine that we talked about that has the virtual DOM. It's doing the same type of thing. If you notice here, there are there's two controls or divs or HTML representation. The one's HTML, and one is React. They both have this ticking field. I type into the React, or try to type into this HTML one, and it won't let me type inside of it. I mean, I can type, but as you can see, every second it refreshes. When I go into the React one, it stays there. Why? The reason why is that on every tick, this HTML DOM is being, the tree is being torn down and redrawn. So whatever my previous state was is being torn down on every tick of that second clock, that interval. Whereas with React is only updating this portion of it. And again, if you go to your developer tools and you go more tools and you say developer tools, right, we want to inspect this element here. So let's inspect this. So if we go to this here, and we can look at this mount node here. So if we expand it, you can tell here by the flashing, right? You can tell that this whole, I can't even expand it. You can see the whole tree is being redrawn. Every time you see that flash, it means on every second tick it's being redrawn in the DOM. Now, if we look at this React element here, if I expand this, you'll see that only the seconds are ticking. Only this element is being redrawn. How efficient is that? You know, and you can imagine a very big application, how a very big UI or application, the entire size of that tree that would have to be redrawn base, and I only need to do the second ticks on that small element, and React is smart enough to know that when it changes to only refresh that component. So how great is that? So that's one of the very benefits of React, to be honest, the performance, the virtual DOM, and the speed of it all and how it renders. So next I'm going to talk about JSX, and let me load that up. All right, JSX. So this is what a little bit of a departure from traditional HTML, although it still is HTML with a couple things to know about. I mean, the point is we're mixing JavaScript with HTML. So JSX, we're just going to give the definition of it is JavaScript extension, is a JavaScript syntax extension that allows us to write JavaScript that looks like XML. I mean, you can, okay, so what that point is that it's, if you remember with ES6 and syntactic sugar, same with Node.js, you are suspending belief here, and we are actually gonna code JavaScript on the server side. Here we're gonna basically say that we are writing HTML, but we're not really. We're doing something called JSX, but it gives us the feeling to tap into that knowledge that we already know, and that feeling that we can build interfaces with HTML with a mix of JavaScript, but know that in behind the scenes, there's a compiler, which I'll show you in a second, that called Babel, that will go and compile and transpile down what we've done. Just like when we did JavaScript and Node, it got transpiled down to C++ and then down to the machine language. This is the same thing. So similar to XML, just to note, JSX has tag names and attributes and children. Not too similar from HTML, but okay, we're gonna say it's close to XML. And then as we said, so if you notice up here, there's a button. So really, that button will talk about components. So that gets translated down again into JSX. So it knows what to do with this. They're talking about attributes, as is these color equals blue and shadow size with this expression. All right, attributes. This is the tag name, and of course we can have children. All right, I can see its point. You know, you could have children like an XML, but you can also have an HTML. Also here you see, you know, this is, it may look like HTML, but there are small differences here that you might not notice right away, and some of them are like this on click here. It's not all lowercase, it needs to be uppercase, and there's a reason for that, which we'll talk about in a second. So JSX, when you're doing these elements, again, I'm telling you the syntactic sugar that we talked about, but really in behind the scenes, there's something transpiling down to React, something the browser will understand, something that React uses. It's called create React element. So on the right side, on the left side, we have this div named sidebar here. Let me just use my laser pointer because I have it. We have this div class here that equals sidebar. And what that compiles down to is react.createElement, which is the element, which is div, and then the properties, the attributes. And in that case, it happens to be class name is sidebar. And then the null in there, if my browser goes away, null means there's no children, right? So over here, at the same time, we have JSX. We have this component now, which is the component tag. It'll be smart enough to understand that. And these are the attributes attached to it. So there's a color blue and a shadow size as some attribute. It'll know what to do with that, and it has some value here. And then it has a child, which is a click me. So what happens is we create React element, my button, and then the attributes, blue and shadow size, and then the child element is the click me text. All right, so the JSX syntax, which we already talked about it. So every functional component that we're going to have needs to return some JSX. So we need to remember that there's always going to be an entry point to a component. When we start talking about components, there's going to be a return, and the return is the JSX. So there's some things that we need to understand about reserved keywords in JavaScript, like I told you, like on click, you know, we need to remember that it needs to be camel cased, right? And some things like class and things need to be, so these attributes need to be camel case, as in the class name for this CSS here, it needs to be camel cased here, because if you do class name, that is a reserved, because we're transpiling back down to JavaScript, it's going to have conflicts. So we need to make sure that all of these things that we may remember in HTML and JavaScript, they need to follow the convention of JSX, otherwise we're going to cause ourselves a lot of problems. So we need to be mindful of that when we're doing the syntax. One thing to note before, I'm going to take a break and look at the Babel compiler in just a second. I just want to talk about expressions. So expressions can be embedded in JSX by wrapping them in the curly braces, the mustaches, as we say, right? In Angular, there's two-way binding. Angular, you can mine the model, and you can evaluate it both ways, or you can do one-way binding, or what have you, using interpolation, right? That's what we call it. In the same type of way, how we pass values or objects can be passed as props, and we can interpolate values within the text context. So we can use this concept called props, which we'll get into again later on, and we can get the value of them inside of our JSX by using this expression. So when we return the JSX, it'll be smart enough to understand that the curly braces need to be evaluated. So if you have 1 plus 2 plus 3, we can evaluate to 6. It's going to be smart enough to know that. So any expression can be embedded in the curly braces, and you'll see a lot of this ternary operation. When we mean ternary, we mean this question mark, which is often called the Elvis operator, because it kind of looks like Elvis, right? The hair, and then the, I don't know, bow tie. I don't know, whatever you wear, but it's just the hair. It's the coif, right? But anyhow, one thing to note is you cannot use for loops or if loops or those kind of things. Those are statements, not inside of this return JSX. You cannot use debugger, right? That is not valid JSX. You need to use either expression or JSX, because remember, it gets transpiled down. So it needs to follow the right syntax, because debugger has a meaning inside of JavaScript. You can't just use it inside of JSX in that way. So let me quickly break for a second here and go back. I'm going to go to this compiler. So this is called the Babel compiler. This is a little bit of an interface. So this will show us what happens. This is running in behind the scenes in the build process in the browser. But if I were to walk up to this and say I want to start doing I'm thinking I'm doing XML, sorry, HTML, but it's JSX. As I'm starting to build, these elements out, span tag, maybe I have a bold tag. I close my bold tag, I have some text, hello world, hello world. I close my bold tag. I close my span tag. I close my div tag. Right when I click here, as you can see here, I don't have the wrapper on here, but you'll see. And let me just kind of get my window better. But okay, it's not actually letting me bring my, what's happening here? All right, forget it. I'll just put it on each line. So as you can see here, well, all right. For argument's sake, I'll just start going crazy with this since it's not letting me. Suppose we have many of these tags. So I'll just start pasting. Right? And what you can see is, because it's not wrapping on me here, you'll see that if I, all right, so let's just copy paste this here and let's open up a text editor and let's just see what that looks like. So it looks like this. Purely create React element has been modified over and over and over and over again. For as many divs as I have, you can see there that it's actually being create React element within create React element within create React element. It's building that entire tree, that entire span. It's just going to keep doing that in behind the scenes. And this is what the compiler does. This is what it's protecting us from. So we can easily write our code with React create element for every single thing we want to. But I think JSX is a much better option, and it's a lot less work, right? You just trust that the compiler will do it for you. So that's that. I wanted to show that just to actually give you the concept of what's happening behind the scenes. Again, we have this concept of class component, JSX class component. So the following JSX code in this class component before it's transpiled. So again, we know class is ES6 syntax. It really translates down to prototypes in the JavaScript, you know, inheritance model. But we're pretending, suspending reality, that this is what we're doing. So class card extends from React component, and you got to note, the thing to note here is it has to do this render, right? Because the functional component has a return statement that expects JSX. Here in this render, we need to pass it some JSX, right? And remember, there has to be a sibling, there has to be a container, which is the parent, and then child. You cannot have adjacent tags, it'll throw errors. Transpiled down. So transpiled down, it's looking at the class. This is again transpiled down for JSX, which probably then gets transpiled down the JavaScript back to traditional you know function and prototypes and those kind of things. But okay, so we inside of our component, if you notice that React create element has now wrapped everything. The parent, the reason why we need one parent element container, because it is the first one here, the attributes, and then the children, and inside it, and then this can be all the nested children. And that's what happens when we are compiling this down. Now this could be the right way. If you want to do this this way, this is perfectly fine. It's a little bit more control, a little bit more work. One thing I know already, one root element, otherwise you'll get this error all the time. Adjacent JSX elements must be wrapped in enclosing tags, so you have to wrap it all in one parent tag. If you look at the wrong way there on the left, you can see they're all adjacent. That's going to give you that error. If you notice on the correct way is to wrap it with a div tag, and the more correct way is to use this thing called React fragment, which I'll explain a little bit about that later. It's a built-in feature. Some tricky things to note. Okay, so comments in white space, just so you know, you have to add a comment in this fashion, which is a slash star dot dot dot. I get caught on that all the time, so you need to actually do something like that. White space is a problem. So sometimes, we got to go back to that old school vanilla JavaScript where we're actually putting spaces in there. So that's a little bit of a problem. If you notice here, you have to kind of say click me and then evaluate the space with curly braces. I don't really like that, but that's what we got right now. Unless there's some new update coming and it's going to correct all that. So what you could do is you could probably, create a constant variable for that text that uses a ES6 template, and then that'll respect all of the spacing, and then inside of those curly braces, you could then evaluate your constant variable, and then it'll evaluate it with the correct text. You could do that. So import. So the first thing you need to do, you have to import React from React, that top line. If you don't, you're going to get an error right away saying there's, React needs to be in the scope of any files where you use JSX, because if you don't have it, it's going to say JSX requires something from React, and it's easy to forget. Down at the bottom there, you also need to remember to export default greeter or the component name. You need to export it, and the default is just, it's going to be defaulted to the name of the component, which is greeter. Using dot notation for JSX types. So this is a very nice way if you have to use dot notation. If you have a module that exports many React components, it's nice to remember that you could have a component that has many components in there, smaller ones. Like there's an example of a date picker. You could have a slider, whatever, a calendar control, all these things. And know that when you return this object of components, you can dig into it a bit and say mine components dot date picker. So using dot notation. And JSX will respect that and know what you mean by that. Fragments. So a couple more slides. I'm almost wrapping this portion up because I already touched on this fragments. So it's pretty neat, to be honest. A common pattern is to have that list of children. So if you look, the child component here has the columns. You could have a table, and you need to wrap it. So multiple TDs need to be wrapped in the parent. So you can't just return these TDs. You have to wrap it in the parent, which then totally results in invalid HTML, right? You have a table row, then you have the div tag wrapped around it, and then your columns. But you don't want that. You don't want to be able to. You don't want excessive tags floating around. So they have this new thing called React Fragment. So it's not that new, but it solves this problem. And what you can do is do React Fragment, and you can do the short syntax, which is even better. It's this greater than, less than, just empty, and with this closing up. If you don't know what that is, you'd be like, I have no idea what's going on there. But what it is this a representation of this long syntax, and then when it outputs, it doesn't include that extra div tag. It respects valid HTML, so it's really great. So that's the wrap on the intro to JSX and Virtual DOM. Next session, we're going to look at just intro to components and React. All right, thank you very much.